this podcast, Jason Carmel from Possible talks about leading an analytics practice in digital analytics world. So stay tuned. So welcome everyone to Future of Data podcast. Today we have with us Jason Carmel. He's a Chief Data Officer at Possible. And a brief bio. So he has about 20 years of digital data and marketing experience. Jason has worked with clients such as Coca Cola, Ford, Microsoft to evolve digital experience based on real-time feedback and behavioral data. Jason manages a global team of 100 digital analysts across Possible, a digital advertising agency that uses traditional and unconventional data sets and models to help brand connect more effectively with their customers. Of particular interest lately is Jason's work using data and machine learning to define and understand emotional components of human conversation. Jason spearheaded the creation of Possible's empathy model, which translates the raw, unstructured content of social media into quantitative understanding of what customers are actually feeling about a given topic, event, or brand. With that, Jason, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Vishal. It's good to be here.
Beautiful. So I think one thing that I found really fascinating about your background is you are from a legal background and then now coming into data science in a marketing agency. It's amazing. So can you just walk us through that journey and sort of those sort of moving points that brought you here?
Yes, it is, I would say, non-traditional probably relative to the other data scientists that I know to have started in law. And I think I can qualify it as me having been a mediocre lawyer at best, which is how I ended up in data science. No, the type of law that I was super interested in at the time was sort of pro bono white knight kind of law, death penalty cases, asylum cases, stuff like that. And I didn't have a massive opportunity to get sort of a paying job for that, and even doing that was just hard to make ends meet. And I was given the opportunity to, as I was looking for work, to help out with a startup. This was back in the first .com boom, and I took it as a way to just sort of bide time. And I found myself as the only non-coder in a startup. And so I was, in essence, responsible for doing a lot of other things that didn't have to do with the actual building of the software, of the product. And we started the software itself that was built was sort of a, I guess if you were to look at it, it's kind of it was a precursor to LinkedIn. It was a contact management software, but it was client side. And so as we launched it and started getting people to sign up, we found ourselves with all of this data. People would sign up, give their contact information, give where they worked, where they did work, used to work, where they would work now. And that data was fascinating. Even as a non-trained data scientist, there really were no data science programs back when I went to undergrad. But the data set was fascinating. We knew there was something there. So I asked the engineers who were busy developing the product to get me information. And they were like, we are too busy developing this product, go bother someone else. And I kept bothering them. And finally they said, here's a login to the database. And here is a SQL for Dummies book. Go figure it out. And I did, or I did well enough. They had to help me. They said, don't ever type the words drop table. They gave me some guidelines to kind of manage it. But in essence, I had a data set and I had a book that helped me navigate how to get there. And it became the most fun part of the job, is to understand what people are doing, how it's changed, how it develops over time. And then that sort of manifested after the .com boom busted. I found myself with a pretty good background in kind of analytics as it was then, and some good intel on how to navigate digital as it was then. And so I was able to jump from law, from any precept of going back to law into this kind of newfound space of analytics. And so I jumped from there to a technology company called J2 Global Communications. They are a house of brands. Their most famous product is eFax. the sexy world of internet faxing.
Hmm.
And I had a great boss there who in essence told me, listen, everything that we do is digital. We don't have a store. We don't have
Hmm.
um, a door to door or anything like that. There's no place except online that you can buy our product. I will let you buy any tool or toy you want, provided you get a 90-day trial and can prove to me that you've increased conversion rate. And like, what a great remit. So in essence, for the 5-6 years that I spent there, I as digital was growing in the early 2000s, I was learning everything that came out there. And I became super fascinated with this idea of A/B multivariate testing, which we used quite a bit.
Hmm.
And then that led to me joining after that an agency focusing on A/B multivariate testing, which is when I first joined Possible about 11 years ago. And then that navigated throughout. I mean, you touch data on one side and you start to learn data on other sides. And I was very lucky in that the agency here gave me a lot of room to grow. And so from joining as a manager, I was able to work up through kind of a regional lead across optimization and testing and targeting, and then to the much larger kind of marketing sciences group that we have now.
Interesting, interesting, and thank you so much for walking us through your journey. And to your credit, I think we are seeing and we I think most of my interaction with CDOs and CAOs who are from legal background, they are kicking so-called rears because they I think data governance is a big piece, and sort of they know the sanctity, and they know sort of all the legal aspect. So I think that's
Yeah,
pretty helpful.
I agree. I think it also, the legal background gives you a sense of what is fixed and what is not fixed.
Hmm.
So governance, GDPR, all of the new stuff that we're dealing with, some of that stuff is super fixed, and you cross the line at your own peril. But everything up to that line is a gray
Hmm.
area,
Hmm.
and a lot of fun happens in the gray area. And so depending on your sense of risk, or your bravery of the flip side of risk, you can achieve quite a bit in that gray area. And so for me, the ability to bring that to bear has been useful. It is probably not how my parents envisioned me using my law degree, but I think at the end of the day, they're quite pleased with my success. So it worked out in the end, I suppose.
Pretty cool. So tell us, explain us your typical day. What your typical day looks like.
I'm sure. So I manage marketing sciences as a group, which is data that, I mean, Possible at the end of the day is an ad agency. It's a digitally
Hmm.
focused one, but our idea is to create ideas that our clients can use to help further their business goals. And so my job and the job of my team is to help on two fronts. Before the idea goes out, can we make the idea bulletproof? Can we show that this idea, even though it looks a little crazy, when you first see it, is actually the smartest thing to do based on all the
Hmm.
information that we know. And then after the idea goes out into the world, it's a question of understanding, did it work? How well did it work? If it didn't work, how do we fix it? And so that's what. And so my day to day is working with all of the leads and on in marketing sciences who work on these clients to make sure that we hit both sides of that equation from a data science perspective.
Interesting. And I think another thing that I found fascinating. Tell us about your recent research on how you're working to understand the emotional component. Tell us about that mindset and sort of what you're doing there.
The emotional content, yeah. So we work a great deal with social media because a lot of our brands are there, and that's a channel that we have to pay attention to. I mean, I almost pined for 10 years ago when everybody had a website,
Hmm.
and web analytics is a pretty fixed system. It's a funnel, and people drop off or they don't, and you can map it. Social media is almost the opposite of that. It's unstructured. A lot of it's anonymous. The language that people use is best case difficult to understand, and worst case just comical, filthy, passionate, all of these things. And for us to understand what and how people are talking about in the context of brands, we found ourselves counting a lot. And anytime you, as a data scientist, just find yourself counting things,
Mm.
it's a bad day. You're you start to get bored. Anything can count, and so counting likes and shares and all of that just was
Mm.
it was the measure of the day, and everybody was reasonably happy with it. But from our perspective, we started wondering if there was something more we could figure out. If instead of understanding the volume of people
Mm.
talking about something or someone or some concept, could we actually run a layer on top of that and kind of use some very lightweight natural language processing to rip out the feelings that they were having. And so a lot of that, I mean, when you say the word data scientists,
Mm.
emotion is not typically the first word that in free association that people will come up and talk about. But it was a fascinating project for my team because they got to learn so much about how the human mind works, how emotions are categorized. We learned, there are 8 primary emotions, but those primary
Mm.
emotions get blended together and propagated for upwards of 50 or more secondary and tertiary emotions that are subcategories. And how do we distinguish between the different flavors of joy using parts of speech, using chunks of narrative. And so for us, that problem was just super fascinating. And so we prototyped it, and it was almost, but not quite, totally wrong. Um, and that little bit of rightness that was there
Mm.
was enough hope for us to iterate on it and to show that we could actually drive business value out of it. And now we bring it to bear for our clients quite a bit, where if we see somebody talking about a brand or an event, it's not just what are they talking about, but it's how they feel about it. One of my favorite stories is Susan G. Komen, the breast cancer
Mm.
awareness research group, was a client, and they had a campaign, and it was historically very successful, where it was very supportive. If you find out that you or a loved one has breast cancer,
Mm.
they want to be known as being there, and so there was
Mm.
all of their campaigns were about women hugging and being supportive and arm in arm, and we'll beat this thing together. And we did some emotional listening for the topic of breast cancer. We found that a younger audience was talking less about support and more about anger. They were angry at it.
Mm.
And all of this campaign about just being supportive was actually annoying them. It wasn't mirroring how they felt. And so we helped build this campaign that's called More Than Pink. And it was the idea of we're going to do more than just be, a supportive pin color, that we're actually going to punch cancer in the face. And all of the campaign was
Mm.
black and white, and the people who were in the campaign weren't smiling. And so it was a really good mirror of the emotion, and the campaign did very well with that demographic because it responded to how people felt. And so for us, the ability to recognize that humans are emotional and not purely behavioral, and to add that layer of data is super interesting for us.
Interesting. Wow. And what's the like? I was reading about empathy model. So what exactly is that?
So that is the layer that we put on top of social listening, and in essence, it's a series of filters that we run all of the body of text through in aggregate to understand when people are talking about the Super Bowl or the summit in Helsinki or the Grammys or deodorant.
Mm.
How they're feeling, and it filters words back in based on what we know about the product, and then it uses some simple bag of words filtering as well,
Mm.
to give us a very again rough cut estimate. The idea is that it will never be perfect, but it is well enough understood that a company, a brand, can take advantage of it and make some really resonant creative for it.
Interesting. And if you can walk us through sort of your journey when this revelation comes, hey, let me do something that sort of works around uh, understanding the conversation and the context behind them and sort of creating those campaign. How do you end up sort of from idea to inception to execution? If you can walk us through that journey and some of the nuances or some of the hurdles and how you end up overcoming that, that will be really helpful.
Yeah, so I guess I think I'm very lucky. I don't know how unique it is, but I know I appreciate the fact that the people that I work with who aren't in the data group are fascinated by the data that we bring. They're hungry for it, and so it wasn't. I mean, there are always hiccups and frictions depending on pressures that come from day to day, but uh, um, more. Almost exclusively, it is the strategists, the creative teams who are asking us for data. So a client will come in and ask us to solve a problem. And then it becomes a research question of, all right, what is the problem? Would we frame the problem the same way? And we look at any number of data sets that we have available, either from the client, either they send us first party data to look at, they give us access to their web analytics or social or mobile analytics, and we synthesize that and bring that to our strategy and creative teams to say this is how we actually view the state of the problem. Sometimes it's aligned, sometimes it is slightly different, and sometimes it's completely unrelated to the problem that our clients see. And then based on that, the strategists take that data
Mm.
and brief the creative teams and say, all right, this is how we want to approach the solve. Here are some channels that we're going to look at. Here is so let's come up with some ideas that might solve this problem. And then based on what the creative team comes back with, my team jumps in and tries to validate that. And there are a lot of things that our creative teams do with respect to, is it a social campaign? Is it a media campaign? Is it email? Is it out of store? Is it in store? Are we trying to drive people to buy online or
Mm.
offline? There's so many of these variables. And our job is to look at the path that the creative team wants to send people down to say, all right, how likely is this to work? Do we have any modeling that we can bring to bear that will show kind of the game theory, the game scenarios that might work or not work? And then we take it to the client, and it's yay or nay, or fix this, or change that, tweak that. Um, and then it's a question of throwing it out in production and making sure that we have a harness in place to understand whether it worked or not. And that's different than just measuring the KPIs within the channel, but it's really, all right, what's the business goal, and how do we break that down into subsets of KPIs that well, you got this much reach and this many clicks and this many likes, when the client really wants to know if people like them or not. Um, and so that's how we integrate, I guess, throughout the agency, from the start of a project through to the end. In some cases, if the campaign is ongoing, we can
Mm.
perform these optimization loops where it's, in essence, A/B testing, multivariate testing, behavioral targeting for new segments. And that obviously makes our initial campaign more successful over time.
Interesting. And one more interesting thing I was talking about, I was reading about is we counter hate. Like what is that? If you can walk us through that project.
Sure. Yeah. So We Counter Hate was a is a piece of work that the agency itself, the Possible itself, kind of came up with, and it started from a strange place. It was just after I guess the riots in Charlottesville, and everybody was kind of in a funk with respect to, I guess, the state of things all up, with just people being hateful, and for no apparent reason, for no other reason. And one of our creative technologists read this article about this town in Germany, who every year this town in Germany would have neo Nazis march through the town,
Hmm.
and they hated it. They just hated it, and they wanted it to stop, but they didn't know how to do it either. If they showed up, they worried that they would give these people a voice. If they didn't show up, they worried that they would be tacitly approving of it, and it was just a struggle for them. So they came up with um, this brilliant idea where, in essence, they sponsored the neo Nazis like a walkathon.
Hmm.
And for every meter that the neo Nazis walked, they would donate money to a program in Germany that's designed to help people escape from neo Nazi groups, to leave that lifestyle. Um, and then that year when the neo Nazis came to march, the townspeople came out and they actively cheered for the neo Nazis. They
Hmm.
had water stations and banana stations, and and it was so weird for the neo Nazis because they didn't know how to react. They're like, if they kept walking, if they stopped, they lost. But if they kept walking, they in essence were funding their own uh, the end of their existence. And it was this wonderful turn of a group of people who were taking back power over what seemed like a powerless situation. And the creative technologist was like, "This is great. Is there a way we could do this for digital? Because
Mm.
every day the equivalent of a neo-Nazi march happens in
Mm.
social media, and it's sad, but it happens.
Mm.
We did some listening on it, and there was 16 million messages of hate speech last year in Twitter alone, not including Facebook, not including Instagram, and that's horrifying. And so the creative technologist was curious if there was a way for us to change that, to make a digital experience like that parade was. And so we came up with We Counter Hate, where in essence we built some machine learning that scrubbed social media and found the worst pieces of hate speech. And when we found it in real time, we would sponsor it, for lack of a better term,
Mm.
where we would reply to the tweet and say, "This is hate speech." And for every retweet of this hate speech, we're going to commit $1 to a nonprofit that helps people get out of hate groups. And so we partnered with a group called Life After Hate, uh,
Mm.
and they are a group of former white supremacists and violent extremists who were able to extricate themselves from those groups and are helping other people do the same. So now, when somebody posts a hateful tweet and all of the other people who follow them are about to retweet it, they get this impossible choice. Either I don't retweet it and the message dies, or I do and I fund this group that's trying to put me out of a job, so to speak. So that was sort of the heart of it, and so we built the machine learning in house to identify this hate speech, and it was very similar to the stuff that we did for the empathy model. Sort of hate is a flavor of speech, just like joy is, and it's very specific based on the specific groups that are going after it. And we've seen tremendous success that when we do respond to these hate influencers,
Mm.
that people stop sharing it. And so for us, it was a really great internal validation that we can use machine learning to solve a problem, that we can use data to help identify and stop something. And it was also such a great project just for us to be involved with because, we're part of the world and this impacts us too.
Interesting, fascinating story, by the way, and thank you for everything, every bit that you guys are doing. And I think one thing that always amazes me is that so digital media companies, they have, as you rightly said, that there are hate marches going on, or sort of they have sort of a close, sort of very close proximity to any of the conversation happening on the social web. I personally I'm not interact, like I don't know what's going on behind the scene, but these digital agencies, they keep track of all the conversation, as you're rightly saying, and they have a sort of a way to understand, and to certain point, even Cambridge Analytica was one such digital agency that
Hmm.
exploited the situation and turned it upside down. So from your perception, like what is the role of digital agencies now in today's times, when most of us are doing our march, as you rightly said, on social media without even knowing that how much of it is real and how much of it is sort of fake.
Yeah, no, I mean the realness versus fakeness of of data is a perennial problem, and it's been exacerbated in social media because people are trying to game the system, as you correctly put it. So for us, it's a question I think of not trying to boil the ocean.
Hmm.
When we approached this, there was a discrete problem that we saw that we wanted to solve, and it's not going to stop hate speech everywhere.
Hmm.
It right now is on a single platform. It focuses on a certain set of worst cases, and it funds a single group. So that doesn't change the entire system. But what it does do is it highlights to people that the world kind of cares about this. That there's a that it's not okay for people to do this. And one thing that digital agencies are good at is spreading the word about things. And so I feel like it's partly incumbent upon us as users of the system to be communities, to be part of the community, and to say, all right, how do we help fix something that we use every day, to make it cleaner for everybody? It's just I think it's good. Um, it's a really nice touch point between something that's good and right and for the world, and something that's helpful for the business too. And it's not just like Possible isn't the only agency that does stuff like this. There's a great there were this great World Cup campaigns in the UK about how when the when England doesn't do particularly well, domestic violence goes up, and so it's a question of how you spread the word about that so that people can take action. So from our perspective, we live in social media every day. It's where we do a lot of our job. We saw a problem that we could solve, and data was, for me, one avenue that we could bring to bear to help fix something.
Interesting. Well said, and thank you so much for every bit of this that every bit that you're doing to fix this problem. And from your vantage point, you have access to a lot of other digital media agencies and what fun stuff they are doing. What are some of the things that you think other media agencies get it wrong when it comes to how they can use data in their decision making process? Like, do you have any thoughts on those?
Well, I mean, I don't know that Possible has a lock on everything that's right versus other agencies that do everything wrong. But that being said, I suppose some things that I think I've learned to think differently about data is firstly, the data is not the end product. I think a lot of times, like, data science is such a big, great, but the work that we do is for creative agency isn't typically the end product. A creative agency makes creative, and my job as a data scientist is to help that team do their jobs better, so that the clients can meet their goals. And if I walk into a room thinking that everyone is there waiting for me to give my deliverable, and once I give my deliverable, I'm done, it's great, then you sort of miss the point. I think data science has to be part of a team, from a advertising perspective. And the minute we walk in thinking arrogantly that we are the product that everybody wants to see, we're going to start to get invited to less meetings, I think. The other thing I think is that I've learned, and I think that I did legitimately grow to learn this, is that accuracy is really a moving target, or perfection, I suppose. There's this great quote by Salvador Dali, and I'll probably butcher it in paraphrasing it, but it's don't be afraid of perfection, you'll never get there anyway. And so the people who it's good to strive for perfection, but especially with respect to the data that we have access to, the ability to ever really know the final answer is a fiction. I mean, people periodically, when we provide models for to predict things, they're like, well, is this what's going to happen? And the answer is no. It won't. This won't happen specifically, but these events are likely to happen in this order. So, and then people are either freaked out by that or not. And the people who are freaked out by that lack of perfection will never really get the strongest use out of data. They'll always be, I need the right answer, without understanding that the future doesn't really have that. The future has many possibilities of probably right answers. And the people who do get that will get a lot of value out of the stuff that we do.
Interesting. And I think one thing that I want your perspective on is, as I think, so you guys sit on enormous amount of data, social media data, are like how folks are interacting. And when you have access to this amazing quality and quantity of data, there's a tendency to go crazy over what all you can do. How do you keep yourself in check? Like, how do you keep yourself focused in and not go sort of in your analysis paralysis sort of roller coaster? What are some of the things that you could share?
No, it's a great question because you're fighting two extremes here.
Mm,
On the one extreme, there's so much we could look at. If we try and look at everything, we'll never do anything. On the other hand, if we only do what's precisely asked of us, we'll miss all the fun
mm,
stuff.
mm,
And so what we focus on is kind of um, sort of skating that a little bit. Where obviously we want to give clients specifically what they ask for, whether it's a report
mm,
or an analysis. But our perspective is then to give them one extra thing.
mm,
It's very Steve Jobsian. We have this. It's sort of an internal, and it's probably the terrible metaphor. But if everyone asks for an apple, you give them apples because they wanted apples. But every now and again, you give them an apple with an orange, just so
mm,
that they can see something else that's a little different.
mm,
Throw a strawberry in there, have some fun. And that opens the world of the person who is asking for apples, that there's other stuff out there. And for the rest of their lives, they may only want apples, but it's incumbent upon us as partners, to our clients, to give them this one other thing so they can try it. And if they try it once and don't like it, great. But if they try it once and it's not particularly useful or relevant, fine. Maybe they'll use it later. Or
mm.
they may try it and fall in love with it, and suddenly they're asking for apples and oranges for everything. And that's, I think, a win. It expands kind of the universe of what's possible for the client. And for our own internal clients, our creative and our strategy peers.
Interesting. And you as a leader in data science, like how do you define the elasticity or plasticity of your workers? Like how much they can flex and innovate themselves vis-a-vis delivering on assigned task. How do you like what's your leadership style there?
I think micromanagement is death. There's some people who really appreciate structure. And I think especially within kind of your stereotypical data analytics world, structure is something that every analyst can get behind. The
Mm,
thing that I really try and push on with my team is that we work at a creative agency. It's incumbent upon you to be creative too.
mm,
And so you always have to do the deliverable first, but there's an incredible amount of creativity in both in how you achieve that, is that deliverable, and then in what you can show after or as a byproduct of that. Um, and that's how all of the innovation, frankly, within our group happens. Somebody answers the question in a unique way, or in answering a question, they answer three other questions that nobody thought to ask.
mm,
And so we do this occasionally, probably not nearly enough, but group brainstorming sessions, sharing of best practices, I think is a great mechanism for us um, uh, um, to push each other to find these new things, because again, otherwise a lot of times the ask of a data scientist is relatively repetitive. A
mm.
monthly report is a report of the same things that happens every month, and the analysis might be a little different. But so it's incumbent upon us, I think, to make the world more interesting as a data group.
Interesting. And how do you as a leader promote creativity within your team? Like what are some of the things that you do to make your, as you rightly said, that they are
Mhm.
working in a creative organization, they have to be creative to begin with. So how do you as a leader help uh,
I,
your team?
I think there are three things that I like to do. So the first is to make sure that data scientists don't just work with other data scientists, and once they work closely enough with um, the creative team or the strategy team or project management, they get a sense of what other questions are being asked, and that spurs creativity. The second thing that we do occasionally is when we learn about a new thing. I mean, by the time this our conversation is over, there'll be 6 new tools that have just popped up in the data sphere. Now you and I both have to go learn about them. And so when that happens, sending those to a subset of people and saying, "What would you do with this?"
Hmm.
Just forcing them to think out of the box of our daily work sometimes is a good, I guess, stretching mechanism. And then finally, we have occasional hackathons, or even we look at the idea of pitching new business as a hackathon. What
Mm.
would we do if we had access to this new data? And a lot of times, innovation comes out of that as well. So those are the three places where I'm able to push my team, and my team is fantastic, and they are hungry for these types of opportunities. It's really the difference between people are successful here versus not. Is
Mm.
if you're stoked about that, you'll do really well here. If you look at it as another one of these, then it's probably not the right role.
Interesting. And how do you evaluate some project to be worth pursuing for? Like, how do you evaluate the validity of something? They say, hey, sure, go ahead. Like, what is your qualifying criteria?
I mean, we look at a number of things like business value. I think
Mm.
obviously if it's a complete if there's no business value, but I think we can look at that even business value pretty broadly. I mean, you look at
Mm.
We Counter Hate is not
Mm.
for it's pro bono work.
Mm.
But for us, it's such a great example to learn and such a great example to talk about it with our clients and with the industry. That even though the business value wasn't um, in finding new clients or making us new products, it was there. So I think we have we're able to look at a number of different inputs to business value, both in terms of will it make revenue, will it make our clients super happy and smarter, will it make our work better, is it interesting? Those are all things that feed into um, what we do. From a just a competitive perspective, if the only thing that we can offer is the same thing anyone else can
Yeah.
offer, I
Yeah.
mean that's kind of a red flag for differentiation, right? So how do we? So I think it is a necessity, functional necessity for us to be able to create these things. And the leadership here is well aware of that and very supportive of us um, of making those investments.
Interesting. And if we talk about say as a leader, what you should care about when sort of you are managing a sort of data practice at digital agencies, like how do you, what are some of the things, what if you are starting a job in a digital agencies, what are some of the things that a leader should keep in mind, or what should be their playbook? What would you suggest to those guys?
Uh, Well, and I mean, I guess in terms of uh, like practical application, being a jack of all trades is helpful. I mean, a lot of people refer to it as kind of being T-shaped.
Mm.
So you're a specialization in one area pretty deeply, but you have to be able to answer the first four questions about anything else. And then even if that fifth question is a real bear and you can't do it, you can at least pass it off to somebody and give them a little context. So having that, I guess, broad view of data is absolutely a recommendation. Getting smart on things that are a little different. If you come in with no social media listening expertise, that's not fatal here, but it is
Mm.
something that you're going to want to understand, even if it's
Mm.
just to know, all right, what is it? How do I describe it? When would I use it? And then I can get somebody else to help me who's much better at it than I am. And then the other thing is more of a philosophical, uh, um, I guess, suggestion for people coming into an agency world, which is both with respect to the people that you work with in other disciplines and with your clients. Never be the smartest person in the room.
Mm.
I think there's a tendency for data people to kind of have all the answers, to want to have all the answers, and you kind of have to let that go. We're here to listen as much as we are to kind of brainstorm and come up with different perspectives on things. And if all our remit is to come in and tell people facts, that doesn't really. I think that misses the true purpose of having a data scientist on your team, which is to kind of experiment a little bit. No, nobody invites encyclopedias to parties.
Mm.
And if all we are is a series of encyclopedias, then we may get asked a question in an email here and there, but we're going to miss all the good parties. So never be the smartest person in the room is that.
Interesting. And what are some of the qualities, or what is some of the qualities of a great data science team in digital agencies? Like what are some of the qualities that you think are must have for a data science team or practice within a digital landscape?
Within this landscape, I don't know that it's so much different than in any other agency or any other industry. I think
Mm-hmm.
there's much less rigidity here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we uh, um, we get a lot of people from the financial sector in to sort of train up as digital analysts, and they're great. They come with a rigor, with an functional understanding of kind of business problems. They're great feeder into where historically there haven't been a gajillion school programs that you could hire analysts out of. People in the financial sector have been a great kind of source for us. That being said, people in the financial sector have a very rigid understanding of what is right and reportable versus what is not fully formed or completely provable. And in our world, especially as we're predicting things, you kind of have to let go of that idea of what is absolutely right. You have to be able to work with data that sometimes isn't there. You have to stub in um, dummy data occasionally. You have to use data that whose hygiene is highly suspect, and you still have to manage to come up with, if not an answer, at least a series of answers that will allow
Mm-hmm.
people to move forward with their job. So for me, the ability to kind of be loose with that, to not say no to a request, but instead to kind of come back with a way around an issue or a gap, is essential. Um, because we are not the financial sector. And while what we do has an incredible amount of import with respect to how people achieve their business goals, a lot of times the data that we have is supposed to be directional. It's meant to be
Interesting.
directional. And if we get too caught up in whether this is the absolute truth or not, we'll never get an answer out.
Interesting. And in your journey so far, like what are some of the um, qualities of some of your best hires? Like if you can list those, what are those?
For me, there's a certain I don't know whether you'd call it's whether this is a combo one or two separate, but there's a kind of a hunger to try new things, and there's a curiosity. I think those are the two things that I can't teach.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else is teachable. We've hired plenty of people who have never seen a tool, an analyst tool in their lives, and that's fine. Like any reasonably savvy 11-year-old can learn how to use an analytics tool. It's not that hard. What I can't teach is this kind of innate curiosity of, all right, if we know this, what are the other three things we don't know, and how do I find that? And if I can't know these two of the three, how do I guess? So that kind of hunger, the to blow through obstacles, to come up with best guesses, and the curiosity to do so are for me what's separated the really good analysts from just the phenomenally successful ones, the ones everybody wants in their projects.
Interesting. Very useful. And if we talk about leadership, like what are some of the qualities that you have seen successful digital agencies pull off from a leadership standpoint when it comes to building or creating a very thriving and healthy data science practice?
From I think there's a little bit of evangelism that has to happen at a leadership perspective. There is an innate skepticism of data. Um, the beautiful thing about sort of creativity is that it's purely subjective many
Mm,
times. But for data, people expect either a right answer or a wrong answer, and we kind of have to disabuse them of that notion. So there's I think a leader of a data sciences group kind of has to help people understand the nuance between that and where it's useful, like where it can actually provide real value. I think there's also this happens maybe less, but I think uh, as data gets propagated throughout other partner agencies or other clients, I think a leader has to be kind of protective of the team, of the methodology, Anytime in my history, anytime I have failed to do that appropriately, I look back at that as one of just the worst misses. Like, you can miss a deliverable, but if you don't realize that the data is being manipulated in a way it shouldn't be, or
Mm,
you're somebody who's on the team is being asked to do something that they aren't comfortable doing or capable of doing, like that's hard to undo. So I think
mm,
it's up to the leader to make sure that everybody is supported in the right way, that people aren't, because I think that's how you end up with these questionably ethical
mm.
um, uh, um, data plays that are out there that have been in the news. It's a good idea that got way out of hand, and that just wasn't regulated well enough. No one was sitting at the top saying, well, I know we can, but should we? Is it
Mm.
okay? Because again, you think data, there's no subjective there, but I think there is. So I think a leader who can navigate that is pretty important.
Interesting. And if you, as an industry observer in digital media space, from a data science standpoint, look at and look at, so what are some of the big opportunities that you think are still existing, which are not yet explored upon in the industry, that you can share.
And I'll give you two uh, off the top of my head. And the first is almost cliche, but I'll explain it, and hopefully it will seem less so. So the idea of artificial intelligence, I think, is a huge opportunity to solve problems. I think right now it is starting to be accessible enough so that data scientists can use it. You don't need a mainframe at IBM in order to make this happen. You can access technology really with just an API key, and start doing it. And to anybody who isn't familiar with it, you will look like a wizard. You will look
Mm,
like just
mm,
you will look like Elon Musk and Gandalf had a baby, and it's awesome. Anytime you can be ahead of the curve on something like that,
mm,
is fantastic. The thing with that, though, is that it can't be, you can't solve anything with AI. You can't sell AI. You have to solve a problem, and so the ability to understand kind of the human question, and is so that you can solve the problem with AI in a cool way, I think is equally important. And that's the second part, is this. As data becomes more available and more readily available, and the tools are available, um, uh, there's a danger that comes kind of distanced from what humans actually need. And so the ability to meaningfully translate the data that we have access to and the outputs from that into something that a human being can actually use and get value from, I think will always be um, uh, a required skill and necessary skill. In fact, the more data that we have access to, the more necessary it'll become.
Interesting. And this podcast is future of data. So if I ask you to sort of predict, or sort of figure out from your crystal ball, what would be the future of data in digital media? Like, what would you say?
Uh, Well, I'm terrible at predicting things, and so I you should see, and that's why I never bet on sports games or anything. I'm a complete failure with that. But I do believe, like, I think the future for advertising is a way to use. Um, Involves using data in a compelling way as new sources of data
Hmm.
come to bear. So our refrigerators are going to start sending data to someone, and that data will be usable in a way that is far different than the refrigerator manufacturer thinks. And so for me, the future of my role and the future of agency participation is to figure out how to in data is to figure out how to break the original intention of data to use it in a way that is wonderful and creative and extremely useful. So how do I take the data that your refrigerator sending out, map it to something that your car is telling me, add that to the last three ads that you saw, and then figure out
Mhm.
where you are in the world and turn that into something that a creative person can turn into a really meaningful campaign that will make you want to buy this brand of gum. Um,
Interesting.
uh, and it's a goofy the metaphor, obviously, but the amount of data sources that we have and the challenges of scattered people and attention, like this is one of the tools that we're going to have and at our disposal. And I think the agencies that see this far enough in advance and hire the right people to get in a place to use that new stuff are going to have a tremendous advantage.
Interesting. Beautifully said. So now we're at the tail end of the conversation, and I want to spend some time on your journey as an executive. So, if I would say in your journey, what are one, two, three things that has helped you stay successful and sane? What would those be?
Successful and sane. There are people who could argue both of those against me, but on the assumption that they are marginally accurate. I would say surrounding yourself with people who are both good at their jobs and good people are tremendously is tremendously important,
Hmm.
both for sanity specifically, and that leads to success. I mean, I think the people that I work with are such a um, I can't under I can't overstate how integral they are both to the success that I've had here in my job specifically, and to the amount of fun that I have when I'm doing it. So for me, the like you can work at a great company doing great things with interesting data sets, but the people that you surround yourself with, both who you hire and the peers that you bring with you, or that you find yourself sitting next to at the meetings are I think is an essential qualification to both sanity and success. I would, if we had another 2 hours, spend the remainder just listing names of people I should thank, but I suspect we don't have time for that. Um, so yeah, I would say that is the probably um, the one pivot that would change successful and sane to the opposite.
Interesting. And one thing that we ask all of our guests to share is their favorite reads, either what they're reading now or some of their favorite reads that you could share with our listeners and viewers. Like, do you have some to share?
Sure. Again, I'll give you two. They're sort of analytics related, and then sort of not. Uh, a really good analytics book that I think, especially for people who aren't very familiar with the social media aspect. It's a book called Trendology. It's by a guy named Chris Kearns. He's a friend, so full disclosure there. But it's in essence understanding how to use and map trends in social media. He spent a great deal of time in the space of social media. He's a data scientist himself. So he's not talking about it conceptually. And he's also an author. He writes fiction books about a teenage girl hacker who tries to prevent the world from ending, et cetera, et cetera. This Haley
Pretty
Black
cool.
series. So in addition to him being a legit, proper data scientist, he's also a legit, proper like sci-fi author. And I think anytime you can get those two things
Right.
together,
It's a
it'll be a
good
good
mix.
read. Yeah. So I'd throw that out there. The other thing, and this is a little more I don't know, metaphorical, I suppose, but there's this great book. It's called Venomous. And
Hmm.
it's by a scientist named Christy Wilcox, and it's about venomous animals, and like snakes and jellyfish and scorpions and all of that. And it seems a bit weird in the context of a future of data, but she has one section in there where she talks about how you measure the intensity
Hmm.
of venom, and I think it's such a wonderful again metaphor for the challenges that we face as data scientists, that I really want everybody to kind of see it. The way she kind of frames it up is um, she's often asked what is the most dangerous animal with respect to venom, and she says just in that question there are a whole bunch of assumptions that depend on how somebody defines the word dangerous. And she
Right.
talks about this box jellyfish, which has the most intense venom of any animal. If it breathes on you, you will die in a second. But it lives in a really remote part of the reef that no one will ever see. The odds of you or I ever running into a box jellyfish are infinitesimal. Compare that to a mosquito who is technically
Hmm.
venomous, but the venom barely affects you. It just makes you itch a little bit. And yet, mosquitoes are responsible for
Hmm.
actively killing tens of thousands of people a year through disease transmission. So, which is more dangerous? Is it the
True.
one that has the most intense venom, or the one that, through other means, ends up killing people more? And like that, I guess, philosophical question is a
Hmm.
really, really interesting overlay on top of everything that we do. What is going to make my business grow? Well,
Hmm.
let's string that out a little bit and ask a bunch of follow-up questions so that we're not giving you the answer that is technically accurate and almost
Hmm.
completely useless. So I love the book. It's about snakes and scorpions, so it's cool. But it also has that great I think tinge, that great analytics reference that I use constantly. It's a good reminder.
That's beautiful, and thank you so much, Jason, on sharing such two cool, good reads. And we're at the last question, and but not the least. And before that, I definitely want to thank you for walking us through this interesting journey and sharing your insights. So, if we want something to take away for our listeners and viewers, so what would that be? Like, what do you want? What would be your closing remark for our listeners and viewers?
Well, I guess I would go back to. I mean, for something that I think could legitimately benefit your listeners and the world, I guess I would go back to the we counter hate conversation and say there's a
Hmm.
lot of data out there that could be used for really good things, and a lot of data that's out there that could be used for not so good things, and that whoever is listening to this, are the people who touch the data. And that no one may ask you to do a good thing, to build a good thing, but you can. Nothing's stopping you. And you have this really discrete, beautiful knowledge set that could
Hmm.
make the world a better place. So find one small thing, even if it's only important to you or a few people, and solve it and see what happens. Don't wait for anybody to ask. And then on the flip side, you have a great sort of personal belief system and compass, moral compass. So if you're ever asked to do something that smells funny, it probably is funny, and and the consequences of walking away from it in the short term pale in comparison to the consequences of going along with it and dealing with the feedback loop in the long term. So I guess for me, that's the one thing I would ask everybody to take away.
Interesting. And with that, thank you so much, Jason. I think very few times we get to talk to someone who's actually investing good amount of time doing not even helping the organizations do good stuff, but also create something to for the humanity. And do appreciate you for venturing into that and sort of even walking our listeners and viewers on some of the ways they can help out, and do appreciate that. With that, you're always welcome back on the podcast. Thank you so much for spending your generous time with us. It was a ball, and thank you for uh, staying sane through my random questions all over the place, and still patiently addressing and helping us understand the world of data science in
That
digital scape.
I should thank you. It's a great conversation, and I appreciate the invitation. I would be glad to come back anytime.
Awesome. Thank you.
I thought I was sick of home, but actually I was homesick. Never really knew that I would have to grow up so quick. I'm so uncomfortable, don't know anybody here. Just a couple dudes that I met once, that's it. And I go into the booth feeling nervous. Got butterflies in my stomach like I'm so worthless. Is the mic on? I don't know how to work this. Inside I'm breaking down, I hope I'm not up on a